Hello everybody, welcome to part 2 of our tutorial on map making for City Skylines. I'm not racing to the end, you didn't miss anything. I just thought I would show you one of the maps that, as I was going through and doing some practice runs and whatnot, this is one of them that ended up towards the end, and so I thought I would throw a couple of trees in it and show you all what it looked like, and yeah, maybe use it as a little bit of inspiration for something that we might end up with at the end of our now 3rd episode. That's right, we're going to 3 parts, which I apologize it's that long, but as I got into it and I started really thinking about the tools and how you guys could use the tools, I'm hoping you guys will benefit more from me showing you how the tools work rather than just saying do step A, then step B, then step C. I kind of want you to be able to take, get to step C and then go off on your own tangent if you want to, understanding the tool sets. So as a result, it's going to take a little bit more, but I think that's okay. And now let's head back into Photoshop and continue on with part 2. Okay, before we get into working on the last bit of our ocean layers, I know I said in part 1 that we were done with the ocean layers, but we have a little bit more to do in here. And it could, it could live in ocean layers, it could live in ground layers, it doesn't really matter. But before I get into that, I do want to do just some quick housekeeping, some things I probably should have mentioned in part 1 episode. The first thing I want to clarify again, and I mentioned this, was so that the image size, and the idea behind this is that if you want to set up your own, you don't want to use this template, that's fine. And here's some of the criteria you need. So it needs to be 1081 by 1081 pixels, and part of the reason is the tiles are 120, and so if you divide 1080 by 120, it fits into there just perfectly. I'm not sure why that extra pixel, it may be who knows necessarily why it's there, but I also have this one set to 300 resolution. That's mostly just so I can get a little more detail as I'm working on it. My understanding is that the game itself prefers a 72 pixel resolution from this 1081. You can import it at 300. I don't think it really matters at all, and when you export your PNG, you can adjust it then. I'll probably resample this towards the end. But that, in combination with the other thing that I wanted to point out, that is, this is set to 16 bits per channel, and the idea behind that is, especially with this grayscale, when we're at this really fine kind of grained, you're looking at individual one slight brightness more than one other one. The difference between 18 and 19 at 16 bits per channel, there's just more. It has more ability to read that information more clearly, whereas 8 bits. And even if you did it at 32 bits per channel, you would even have a better gradient between white and black, and more grayscales in there that you can work with, at least in the way the program reads it. So Cities reads it at 16 bits, and so that's where we should probably work. I don't think I'm going to change that, and that'll also play into something else I'll talk about here in a minute anyway. The other thing I wanted to mention real quick too is that I deleted that the threshold layer, and I need to re-add it back for another reason here in a minute, but if you're creating your own from scratch, where that's located is an adjustment layer, and so I'll just go ahead and add it right now. You're just adding a threshold adjustment layer, and you can call it threshold 1. You don't need to worry about any of these other things, and it'll pop in where it's located right now. It's actually doing a threshold for everything below that, and we don't really want it there. We're going to want that back in our ocean layers here in a minute, and this will be more clear in just a minute, but what you're looking at here is what it's currently saying below it. And right now what we really have being shown is this landmass with a black background that's using to screen out a lot of these clouds layers, and so it's a pretty narrow band. You've got white and black, and that's what you're seeing here is you've got this high line means there's a lot of white that's in here, and this is showing you these levels of blacks, and then there's a little bit in between that, if we, as you can see, we start to scroll down through here, if you could see those grays, they'd be disappearing, and as we start getting into here, all of a sudden that black, the deep blacks are starting to disappear, and so you can see kind of what's existing within there. So that's how you get that threshold layer in there, and you can utilize that. So let's go ahead and move into our next bit here. And so we need to go into our landmass now and add a grayscale value to that. And as you can see, if you go back and kind of compare this to part 1, I've actually done some more tweaking on it. And you'll do the same thing. You'll come up with your base, and then you might sit on it for a little while. And when I got back in here and was preparing to do this next part, I decided I wanted to add a few more potential river locations and a couple of islands that were out in here. And so this is more like a delta where the river would split, and it gives us some more opportunities for some interesting gameplay elements. You can have stuff out on an island, things like that. And the other thing to remember about kind of planning ahead a little bit is the way rivers flow. Of course, they float downhill, and when they join together, they're pointed downhill, and so this is clearly coming downhill and tying into this river. It doesn't mean that it couldn't come back up and tie back up into it at a kind of a funky angle, but that would still have to be downhill. And when you look in plan view, they're all kind of flowing down towards lower elevations, and they come together like this. And so as we start adding in maybe some other little streams or draws where water could possibly flow that aren't actually filled with water, just think about those. And I'll talk a little bit more about contours in a little bit when we get into that point. But the very first thing we need to do is we need to step in and grayscale our landmass so that it's much closer to that black. And so we're going to do that by, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my landmass file or layer there. I'm just going to duplicate it, and I'm going to hide it. And that's a bit of a backup. And so if I mess something up, I can come back into it. Then we just want to hit Control and then click on that thumbnail right there, and you can see it adds the marching ants around it. Basically what it's doing is that Control left click, sorry. Control left click is going to select everything on that layer automatically. And now what we can do is we can come in, and by the way, and I just mentioned HSB, I didn't get into what that actually means. That's hue, saturation, and brightness. And so what we're messing with really is just purely the brightness. And because that really counts on this grayscale value, that's why we're using the brightness, is because it's a lot easier than trying to use CMYK. K is often black, and we could use that as well. If you set that at 100% black, that is actually more, almost more black than it might otherwise be. But if we change our CMK values to 0, you can see that it actually starts messing with some other things. There actually is a little bit of color in there, and we don't want that, and that's why we're just sticking with just pure brightness. We're getting rid of hue and saturation, zeroing these out, and we can brightness 0 out, and it's a little different value than that K. So that's why we're using the brightness value. And so now in thinking about the elevations in the game, I think in part 1 I talked about 200 as being an elevation, or 20 as a brightness. And as I started playing with it a little bit more, I realized let's go ahead and push that down a little bit more. I don't think we want to be any more than maybe like 12 or 13 as our base land value, and then we can set our ocean at an elevation of 10 or an equivalent of 100, because we've only got 1,000 meters of elevation within the game. We don't want to give too much of it back to the ocean, and you can even push that down further. The difference is then you start losing some ability to have variation on landmass within the ocean, or that bottom water layer. So I think setting it about 120 for our landmass with a water elevation of 100 or 10, that gives us enough area in there to play with a little bit. So in fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and set it at 13. Let's do that. You can 12 or 13 right in there somewhere, and I'll show you why I've got that, just to give a little more variety. So let's do that, and then we can hit Alt backspace. Will fill in that landmass layer, and then Control D is going to unselect our selection, and so you can see it's just pitch black right now, and you're thinking, God, I can't see anything. Let's turn off our threshold, because I had that threshold layer in there. I threw that in there so that I could be able to see what was going on, and that kind of messed everything up. So go ahead and turn that off. If you add that back in, we'll need this in a minute, but for right now, go ahead and turn it off. So as you can see, this grayscale value, we have white areas now. We have areas where we have a white that's brighter than our grayscale value, sorry. And so if we were to put this into cities right now, this elevation would be higher, and we don't want that. So what we need to do now is adjust our backgrounds a little bit, and this is really going to be a perceptual thing to some degree. You can also use your picker, which is I. Just hit the I button, and you can select that, and then you can double click on your color here, and you can see it's at 13. It's exactly what we filled it at. And you can come out here and pick out in the ocean on one of those white, that slightly brighter white, and you can see it's 12. So it is slightly less. And just do this in a couple areas. We're at 12 in that location. We're at 3, so that's going to be quite a bit lower. Looking back up into the rivers here, we're at 10. So everything seems to be below for the most part. Yep, 3 in there. And this might be hard to see on the video screen. I'm not sure exactly, depending on what you're watching it on, but there is a slight variation. It's more black right in this location, and then it's a little bit more gray up into here. There's a little bit more white, but it's still, the value is still quite a bit less than what our landmass is now. We do have some areas in here from this clouds layer where the white starts to get to the same value. And so when we put this into cities, there's going to be virtually no difference, and there's going to be, you're going to have to do a fair amount of editing to kind of fix that within there. And so we want to try and do as much of that in here as we can. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm probably going to increase the opacity, or decrease the opacity just a little bit more to gray that out. And if you're feeling like you're losing too much variation in your oceans layer, depending on what you want to do below the oceans, you can brighten this back up again a little bit. And I'm going to show you just one quick technique that you can use. We talked about not impacting the clouds layer at all. This is the one spot where I think you probably can, and it'll be okay. And so there's one of the tools that we have over here. If I see if I can get the menu to pop up. Come on, buddy. So you have a dodge tool and a burn tool. And the idea between these particular tools is that you can go over these values and sort of burn them out, or dodge just to whiten them back up a little bit. So you can darken them or whiten them really subtly using these tools. And so you come in here with a burn tool of about a 50 exposure, and it might be. I'm going to go ahead and brighten it up right now, just so you get a little more, so you can see it a little more clearly when I do it, and then we'll lower it back down. But you go over these whites, and in fact, let's go ahead and increase the exposure just a little bit. You can see they're starting to darken up and gray out just a little bit. These whites become a little bit less white to some degree, and I'm kind of clicking over this multiple times, trying to get it to, oh, well, that's part of the problem is I'm in the wrong background. No wonder it's not working. So let's go back into the clouds layer here. There you go. It's becoming a lot more clear now. So I'm clicking over it, and I'm burning these clouds out just a little bit. And now that I've done that, let's go back into our, oops, dadgummit, our black background here, and we're going to, you know what, just hang on one second here. Yeah, I think I'm okay. 0. Sorry, I'm having to recolor that layer a little bit. But yeah, there we go. So we got to turn back a little bit. Let's turn this back up, because I want to be able to see some of these grays into here. And now I can go back into my clouds layer with my burn tool and start moving these grays back just a little bit. So we've got a little more elevation. Come in maybe to the rivers where we've got some of these issues, and burn out some of that that white, and that's going to help a little bit. Maybe some more out here. We'll get a bigger brush going, and we're just going to try and get some of this white out of here a little bit. So that should be a little bit better now. Let's do our little color picker. We'll take a quick look. Yep, we're down into the 9 value, so we've lost 1 or 2 grayscale values out there, and I think that'll help a lot. So you can continue to do that to your heart's content, and figure out a way to make sure that your landmass out here is clearly a higher elevation than at least your kind of your ocean layer in the beginning of your river habitats here. We'll modify those a little bit more later on too. Okay, so one quick way to check that again is you can go into your threshold if you just want to play with it a little bit, and you can see this really clear line. There's nothing above that. That I think we set it at 13. So as soon as you cross that 13 threshold, boom, that shows up as white. Because right now we're using the threshold layer. But the other thing you can do is you can start sliding this, and you can see where areas are in that grayscale value that's kind of that's equivalent to where you are within this threshold. And you can see where things grow, and so you can come back to where that you cross the landmass, making sure that everything in that water elevation is below that. Then as you move down through those numbers, you'll start to see things grow out of the ocean, and those are the places that are going to be the most shallow in the ocean. Then you're getting deeper and deeper into the ocean, things like that. So that's a good way to sort of double check and make sure that you don't have anything that's above the elevation. So now we're going to go into our landmass. I'm going to duplicate this again just as a safety precaution, move that into the background, and then within the landmass we're going to start adding some adjustment layers. And I'm sorry, I did a layer style, and the 2 particular things we're going to use within layer style are going to be stroke and inner glow. So we're going to start with the stroke. And what we know is that our landmass elevation is that 13 grayscale. And what I'm trying to do, actually, I'm going to show you real quickly in City Skyline. I'm going to go ahead and import this into City Skyline so you can see it real quick. And as you can see in here, when we import this, you can see how sheer the cliff is between the landmass and the bottom of the ocean. And we don't want that. We want to take this edge where the water line is, and we want to smooth that out a little bit. We want to have some kind of gentle rise up into the landform. We don't want it to be such a sheer cliff. And so when we go back into Photoshop, what we want to do is we want to go along the shoreline and we want to add a gradient value to it so it transitions a little more smoothly from the ocean to the landmass. And so what you do is you can go into your landmass, just double click on your landmass layer, or if that doesn't work for some reason, you can go back into layer, layer style, and then select stroke, and it'll bring up the same dialog box. And unfortunately, when I'm in these dialog boxes, I've realized my pointer doesn't show up. So I'll try and describe these a little bit better as opposed to like describing it as I'm pointing at things. So you want to select the stroke value to start with. And actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and cancel that real quick, and I'm going to zoom in. You can leave yours open if you're watching this. I just want to zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. And then we'll pull the dialog box over out of the way, back to stroke. And let's change the color value right now. Well, let's go ahead and set the brightness to 10. And what we're doing is we're setting this, this is the lowest point on our continent or on our land masses. And so I'm setting it at 10 because our ocean is going to be slightly below that. You may typically want it to be a little bit higher than that, because if we're going from 10 at the shoreline to 13 as our kind of our basic ground layer on the landmass, that's two brightness values difference in between that, and we think about that. So from 10 to 13 in game, that's the difference between 100 and 130. So it's roughly 30 meters of difference between the two of them, and it could be quite a bit. So, but right now we're leaving it at that just for clarity's sake, and so I can show you what the differences are. So the size, of course, in here you can see what it's doing in that gray. Let's change the color something a little brighter so it's a little more clear. But it's changing. You're basically just changing the thickness of that stroke. Inside outside position, I think it's pretty clear. Inside is inside the stroke, outside is outside, and centered is centered on that stroke line. And I typically use centered, but there may be reasons to use other ones. It's sort of up to you. We're getting into that artistic component now at this point. So I'm going to go ahead for right now and set mine to 2 pixels because I want a pretty relatively sharp line along the shoreline. And then we'll set our color back to 10 for right now, and then we're going to go into our inner glow, and now we're trying to create that transition from the stroke to the landmass. And so the kind of the basic quick settings, we want to have a normal blend mode. We want to set our opacity to 100%. Down in elements, you want to make sure it's set on technique of softer with the source on the edge. Right now, make sure definitely that choke is set to 0. You might bring your size up a little bit just so it's a little bit more clear what we're trying to do, maybe into the mid-20s. On quality, make sure your anti-alias is selected, and then bring your range down to maybe about 20 for right now, and I'll describe what that does here in just a sec. Now let's go up and set our color. I'm selecting the gradient value within the structure, which is the color to the right, and then double-clicking on the box to bring up the gradient editor. The left-hand box is, or the left-hand, stop value over here that we want to set is going to be, it's going to zero out hue and saturation, and then we want our brightness value to be set at the same as the stroke, so that's 10. And then we want to set the, you know what I didn't do, sorry about that. What we want to do is we don't want this is going to a transparency, we don't want that. So select this first value that's either foreground, background if you're set to black and white, or you could use the third preset, which is black to white. So let's just double check this again real quick. I'm going to set that left value to 10, the same as the stroke. And the right value is going to be set to the same as the landmass, which in this case is 13. And I'm going to set it to about 16 right now, so it's a little bit more clear, and then we'll reset that in just a second. And so the two values I think you're going to really be tweaking a little bit. You may choose to use choke. With that, you can see what that does is it just narrows the band between those stops and makes it a much more sheer cliff. So we don't really want that right now. The size just makes it a little bit smoother transition from the stroke out into the landmass, and so you can play with that with whatever you want it to be. And then the range, I'll show you what that does, and you may find value in it depending on what you're trying to do. What it's basically doing is it's moving that left stop color in or away from the stroke value. And So you can see that that stroke's standing out a little bit more. The more I kind of move that range to the left. And so you do want to take this and you want to get it to the point that that stroke line just starts to disappear, which for me is about right there at about 40. And then maybe adjust the size a little bit. I want to smooth it out, but as you can see, that stroke, the more I get away, oddly enough, is starting to show up again. And so it's just, you kind of go back and forth between size and range. Oops, I didn't want that. Size and range, trying to find a happy medium to what you're trying to get to. So like I said, I wanted a relatively narrow range, I think. And again, we're going to adjust the color up in here, so it's going to look a lot less severe than this in just a sec. So actually I think right in there is pretty good. And then we'll go back into color, change our right stop back to our landmass value, which was 13. And there we go. So let's go ahead and real quick, I'm going to show you how to export this. I don't think I've done that yet. So you could go to Save As. Make sure you don't use Save for Web. Use Save As. And then for me, I went ahead and set up a shortcut to my Heightmaps directory from here, which is, you'll have to Google that. Maybe I'll put that in the links with the typical path is to your Heightmaps directory. But so I set mine up in there. This might actually be a good opportunity to just go ahead and hit Control S to save your base file. And then save as. Oops, gotta wait just a second. Save as. And then we'll go to PNG format. I'll go to my Heightmaps. And you can see I've already got a number of other ones in here. These are the two snapshots that I'm going to show right now. Snapshot 1 was the one I had earlier, and snapshot 2 is this one. So let's go into Cities Skylines real quick, and I will take a look at this map. And yeah, here we are with the first map again. You can see those sheer cliffs that we had. I went ahead and took the ocean out so we could see it more clearly. And now let's import that the second snapshot here. Hello, come on in. No, I don't want to export. Hit the wrong one, sorry. Import. And then you can see really quickly what that just did to the edge there. And you can start seeing, how that that gradient value along the edges really helped make this a little bit smoother transition. And so now we can come in and set the ocean layer at let's set it at 100 for right now and see what that does, because we had our value of 10 right along the edge. And there you go, it comes right up to that edge. And what we're going to do later on as we start getting into the ground layers is we're going to start actually bringing in things that are like cliffs along these edges. This is just to set the value and get something that's a little bit more gentle rising up out of it. So as we start improving the ground plane out here on the landmass, we have some flexibility in what we're able to do. And so I would say generally speaking, this turned out pretty well. It's maybe a little bit on the uniform side. I would probably go back and tweak that just a little bit, but that gives you an idea of the difference between the two of them. And this will be interesting to see what happens if we try this. Let's go back and reload that first snapshot. And you can see that that's just flat and sheer, and we don't really want that. So let's re-import that snapshot too, and that's going to do something funky to the oceans, but whoa, look at that going. Tsunami. Anyway. That gives us an idea, so let's go back into Photoshop real quick. And now we can zoom out in here, and again, if you want to, we can start tweaking it. I'll probably tweak it a little bit here in just a minute. And I think what I'm going to do right now, actually, is I'm going to end this part of the tutorial because I don't want these to get too long, and it's going to take a while to go through the mountain and ground layers. And I had hoped to get to that in this part of the tutorial, but at the same time, I want to make sure and spend the time to really be clear about what some of these tool sets are so that you guys can know how they work instead of just copying exactly what I'm doing, and that'll allow you to create your own maps. So I think what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to narrow that band up a little bit. It was a little bit kind of a sheer a little bit too much of a gradient transition between those two, so I might do like I had said earlier, instead of having 10 to 13, I might go 11 or 12 to 13 and just soften up that a little bit before we move into the next one. And I appreciate it. So we'll see you guys in part 3 of the tutorial. I appreciate you guys watching it. If you're so inclined, subscribe, certainly leave a like, and I would appreciate it. And we will see you shortly in part 3. Thanks very much.